I don't know about you, but I'm pretty sure that was a Bigfoot. Let me tell you a story. These stories are based upon true events. Welcome back for another Bigfoot Campfire Story. I met a group of campers while on a retreat in West Virginia. As usual, I tend to get people alone and ask them if they've ever seen a Bigfoot. One of the older fellows in the group by the name of Grady opened up and told me the most incredible story I had heard so far. This is that story. I guess most time you get asked a question like, have you ever seen a Bigfoot? I may have just skipped telling the story, but I'll be honest as I can be. See, Frank, Marty, and I were setting up the trip to go spelunking. That's cave diving to you regular folks outside. Right outside of Minnehaha Springs, close to the Virginia line. Well, the hills there are known for cave systems that go on for dozens, if not hundreds of miles. Marty and Frank were brothers. They got their passion for caves from their dad, but I grew up near Knoxville, home of the Million Caves, and I mostly lived for cave diving since I was a little kid. I met the brothers by chance on one of the cave parks we have here. Pros and amateurs alike take on the challenge of a new cave, and often the three of us just kind of hit it off, so we plan a few trips a year to test our skills and our limits. On this trip, we decided to up the game a little and pack camping gear in to sleep inside the cave system all night. Frank and I didn't think Marty would be able to hack it, as he gets a bit claustrophobic after hours underground, so we'll see how it goes. Anyhow, since I had a 4x4 crew cab truck, I usually drove these adventures, and Marty would navigate while Frank would sleep in the back to fight off his car sickness. So I geared up and I went over to pick the guys up. When I pulled up, Marty was on the phone with somebody, as Frank was tossing their gear into the back of the bed. As the guys got into the truck, Marty, still on the phone, was heatedly scribbling down numbers on his hand. He says, "Hot lead, boys. I got the GPS of a cave no one's seen in modern times. My buddy Phil found the GPS on Google Earth, and it's only 10 minutes from where we were going anyhow, so it probably links up to the same system. But this is a new entrance, and with the 4x4, we should be able to get there just fine." Well, I was in, and Frank had no choice, so off we went to find this mysterious entrance to a new cave. Well, this is like crack to a caver. A new cave no one's seen in years or possibly decades? Not possible, but we'll find out. I set the GPS numbers into Not Siri, and off we went. 4.5 short hours to go, and nothing like playing stupid traveling games with your buddies in the truck. Nope, I don't spy nothing because smack, punch bug, that's right. I remember that especially because that's when Frank woke up, needing a pit stop. And lucky for him, we were nearly there, so we stopped at the broke-down gas station on the edge of the hills. Now, this place was legit, right out of a horror flick. Creepy old bastard out front with no teeth. The only thing missing was a banjo and Ned Beatty. Well, Marty gassed up the truck, and Frank went to find the bathroom, only to find out it's literally an outhouse out back. So nasty you wouldn't use it if your life depended on it. Well, I went inside to pay the clerk, and to all my wonderment, was a pregnant late teenager at the counter with a look on her face that read, "I don't know you, stranger. Are you lost?" Well, I paid for the tank of gas and some supplies I'd picked up, and asked if she knew where the road to the caves were located. Well, that's when Missy Faye's attitude completely changed. She started snarling at me about not messing with those caves. She started shaking and wagging her finger at me, saying, "Those caves are cursed, mister, and anyone that goes in those caves are cursed, and their families are cursed. Some never come out again." Well, she was so direct that she shooed me out of the store, and then shut and locked the door just behind me. Well, poor Frank, about to crap himself, finally ran into the outhouse, and I got it over with Marty as I loaded up the truck. We noticed the old toothless guy was gone. Well, we slipped out of the truck and went around the back near the outhouse, and sure enough found that old freak in the back of the outhouse sniffing Frank's turds. Well, Marty nearly lost it and beat the man, but I held him back as Frank came rushing out to all the commotion. When Marty told him what happened, Frank rushed right past me and pushed the old man to the ground, who in turn cursed us all with the words, "You'll never be seen again." And with that, we loaded back into the truck and drove out of that old station. Well, Aunt Siri gave us pretty decent directions from there. It took us to the bottom of this road trail, probably an old logging road from the 70s, but it doesn't look like anyone had used it in a very long time. And I dropped it into 4x4 and off we went to find the cave. We drove for what seemed like hours again, up and down and around this trail. A couple of places it got pretty steep, and another where the water was deep enough to put a butt puckering moment. But finally, Not Serious said we were there, just in time, too, as we still had about 4 hours of daylight to get our gear straight before the descent into darkness. Well, not knowing the conditions of the entrance, we had brought nearly everything one would need to get in it. We just had to find the entrance first. We split up and searched the area and looked for what Marty had said was going to be a half moon. Well, I noticed the ridge behind us was quite a bit higher, so I took the time to hike up, and sure enough, I could see the half moon just below Frank. Well, I radioed down and guided Frank to the opening, and then I left the ridge to join the brothers right there at the entrance. Well, it was kind of a strange place. There was no signs of animal life, even though there was a spring right on the other side of the meadow, and yet it was eerie, like something or someone was watching us. Well, the initial drop-in looked easy enough, about 20-foot drop to the floor, so we geared up and anchored off the ropes and descended the first wall together. Once in the cave, we noticed a rock crabbing that led back to the top of the ropes were entirely overkill, but one could not have known without coming in here at least once. In fact, the rocks seemed to make a nice staircase back up to ground level, so I walked over there to check it out. It wasn't all that dark quite yet, so I noticed markings on the wall next to the rocks. At first they appeared to be almost claw marks, like someone had been clinging to the wall and dragged into the cave deeper, but there were many, many of these strange markings. Well, as I climbed the rock stairs, I noticed some kind of writing scribbled on the wall, but it was most definitely not English. So I called the guys over to take a look. Well, none of us had seen anything like it before. It was dug into the rock with something hard and sharp, and it seems to have been there for a very long time. Well, I picked up some of the dark dirt and rubbed it into the cuts to make the script easier to read. Marty, being a smart man, had a notebook with him, and he took a rubbing of the marks to look up later. Well, finally, after returning to the surface and down a couple of times, all of our gear and torches were ready for an epic weekend underground. The idea was to explore the inside until late in the day, then set up camp underground and eat and sleep and keep on going, rather than waste as much time each day getting back out, only to waste that same time the next morning going back in. We kept the gear to a minimum, as there's tight places to get around, so your gear pack could be no wider than your shoulders and no thicker than your body, so it wasn't going to be much comfort at all. We had been exploring for a few hours, and just as we expected, these caves were all linked. We even found a few other entrances to the system. Not really exits, as to climb out without ropes would be dangerous, but finally, we found a ground-level entrance to make up for the night. Frank had spotted it at first. The dim light was dusk barely enough to see, but sure enough, it was an easy climb out, and there was a ton of dry wood laying all about. We noticed it had a very musky smell to it, but figured something had been using it for a den at some point, but not to worry, they won't come back once we light a fire. It was the easiest thing to eat underground, so we got out the MREs and began to cook them up. Once the fire was lit, it would definitely keep the animals away while we slept. We managed a good meal, and the next thing you know, Marty breaks out the harmonica and a blunt. This night was about to get a bit nutty. And we smoked and laughed and listened to Marty wail on the harp for what seemed to be a little way too long. It was time to sleep, so we stoked up the fire and laid around it for some rest. When I was awake, and I had no idea what time it was, when I became aware I was being kicked by Frank to wake me up. He was crouched down beside me, now saying there was some kind of an animal at the cave entrance pacing back and forth. Well, I shook Marty awake, as he was the guy with the gun, and startled awake with a scream of, "Leave me the fuck alone!" and a smack, and we heard the animal run off. Finally awake, we told Marty what was going on, and he grabbed his 44 Magnum out of his pack. We sat all low near the fire, listening to the dark. Where there had been crickets and night sounds, now there was silence. We decided to take a look around outside the cave entrance, so we got out our torches and climbed out to check it out. Well, right at the top of the entrance, where you could see down into the cave, were several sets of footprints, larger than any of ours and barefoot. Frank put his foot right in one of it, and it didn't even cover the toes. Then from a distance, something came charging at us from the brush. It was dark and hairy and very fast. Well, Marty brought up the revolver and fired off a shot, then a second, then a third, but missed. Then the animal ran off into the darkness. Well, we decided, this was enough. We went back into the cave, stoked up the fire while we gathered up the rest of our gear, and we were going to head back to the truck. Well, as we went back into the cave the same way we had come this way, we started hearing movement in the cave behind us. We remembered that those other entrances seemed impossible to use, but they must not be for this thing. Then we heard a similar animal call come from behind us on the other side. Now suddenly, there were two, maybe even more coming. Well, we hastened our pace, but as we got to the next barrier, there in front of us was one of those creatures, now lit up in full view of all of our lights. Tall, very slim, with stringy brown hair, covering it from head to toe. Longer on the arms and very trim through the waist. This thing looked like it was made for the caves. Then from the other side of the bowl came another one into view. They had us trapped inside, and Marty only had 3 shots left. Well, we huddled together for a bit, mumbling to each other about what would best do next. Frank said screw it and picked up a big rock and threw it towards the big one behind us. It ducked the rock, and then it charged at us once more, stopping only a few feet from where Frank was standing, and then returning to its post at the entrance. Finally, Marty, frustrated, aimed the gun at the one near the front and let out 2 rounds, and then turned and fired the last round at the one behind us. It ran away so fast it seemed impossible. We turned back to the front, and Marty's bullet was right on target. He had struck the skinny one right in the head, and it now lay dead where it had once been standing. Well, Frank, Marty, and I just wanted out of this situation, so we dropped nearly everything and ran back to the entrance where we came in. We made our way nearly to the entrance where we could hear horrible wails coming from the cave within, and then the sound of something coming our way. We all scurried up the rocks and then out to the truck. We jumped into the cab, started the engine, and drove as fast as we could down the logging roads. It was still dark outside, and not knowing the trails, I had to be careful not to go the wrong way. Every now and then we could hear that horrifying wail coming from the hills behind us as we descended the mountains. Just as the sun peeked from the blackness, we arrived back at the gas station we had left from the day before. The place now looked abandoned, as if no one had been there, yet we had gotten gas here just the day before. My cell phone was dead, but there was a payphone on the lot, so we used it to call the local sheriff. When the law arrived, we told him exactly what had happened the day before, here at the station, and then again through the night up in the cave. The sheriff looked at all 3 of us, spit his chew spit out, and said, "This place hasn't been open in nearly 10 years. Y'all boys are telling tales now, aren't you?" Just then, as we looked back at the truck, the sheriff laughing his ass off, we noticed something written on the truck through the dirt. It said, "Cursed," in big letters, and then a giant, hairy handprint with finger drag marks across the back. When we turned back to show the sheriff, he too was gone. Well, that was enough weirdness for one trip for us, so the 3 of us piled into my truck and drove back home as fast as we could. We simply left our gear behind, as there was no way any of us would ever be going underground again. This trio of brave souls dared break the warning of the creepy old toothless man at the abandoned gas station and nearly paid the price. I'll stick with well-known locations for me. Thanks for listening. I'm Reverend Jeff, and may the Squatch be with you.